Hello and welcome to Animal Zone with Professor Monzon. With the last video, we finished the unit called Diversity of Life. And with this video, we will start a new unit called Activity of Life. So basically, we'll focus on life processes. In today's video, we focus on homeostasis, osmoregulation, and thermoregulation. We will follow the outline from Hickman's Integrated Principles of Zoology, Chapter 30. First, I'll talk about homeostasis. What is it? Then we'll talk about osmoregulation with a focus on the terrestrial animals. And then we will end with a brief discussion about thermoregulation or temperature regulation. I want you to watch this video. If you have the PDF available, click on that link. And if you're watching from YouTube, I'll have the link on the description below. But it's a neat short video about the kangaroo rat, which is an animal that we'll discuss shortly. Okay, homeostasis, what is it? Homeostasis is the maintenance of an internal steady state by means of self-regulation. The maintenance of a steady state could be many things. It could be the maintenance of a steady temperature or a steady pH or a steady concentration of electrolytes or a steady heartbeat. Basically, homeostasis is an endless balancing and rebalancing of physiological processes to maintain stability and restore normal state when disturbed. We'll get back to this in just a moment. Basically, the concept of homeostasis applies to all organisms and physiological processes and thus permeates the fields of physiology, medicine, and pharmacology. Think about it. All organisms need to return to a state of normalcy when disturbed. Well, what disturbs the internal environment of an organism? Think about it. What disturbs you? You know what disturbs me? Bad sequels disturb me, like Mean Girls 2. Well, not like I've seen Mean Girls 1 or anything, but all right. Anyway, let's get back to homeostasis. Basically, disturbance can occur from two possible sources. First, the metabolic activities require a constant supply of materials. Like oxygen and salts and nutrients, they have to be constantly replenished, and also metabolic activities require a constant expulsion of cellular waste. So this constant need to bring in new things and a constant need to get rid of wastes creates disturbance. Secondly, changes in the organism's external conditions. For example, if it gets too hot, or if it gets too cold, or if the pH changes. Or imagine a salmon going from the ocean into a freshwater stream. And so the salt concentration changes drastically. So basically, the things that can disturb the internal environment of an organism are things innate to the organism, right? This constant need for new materials and constant need to get rid of wastes and things that are going on the outside. Let's talk about water and osmotic regulations. Internal solute concentrations must be kept at a range that allows cellular function to proceed. The cell membrane is selectively permeable. So it permits water and small ions to flow through the membrane across concentration gradients. That is most of the time a passive process. And so animals control water and ion balance inside the cells by regulating what's going on outside in the extracellular fluid. You remember, for the cell to function, the internal environment of the cell membrane must be just right. How does an animal control the internal environment? By controlling what's happening just outside of the cell. And then this passive processes of water and ions moving across the cell membrane will take place. All animals must maintain their salt and water balance. However, if you're living in water, it's not that hard to remain hydrated, right? So that's why I want to focus on terrestrial animals, because the terrestrial environment is the most different from the cellular environment. After all, animal bodies are mostly water, and all metabolic activities proceed in water. Also, terrestrial animals evolved physiological mechanisms to avoid desiccation, because animals lose water in a variety of ways. For example, evaporation across respiratory and body surfaces, excretion of urine, and elimination of feces. Let's take a look at this kangaroo rat. This kangaroo rat is losing some water in feces. Even though it's defecating very dry feces, there's still some water in there. Even though its urine is very concentrated, there's still a lot of water in there. But most of the water lost by this kangaroo rat will be through evaporation, especially through its lungs. So essentially, every time this kangaroo rat exhales, it's losing a little bit of water. Same for us. Every time that we breathe out, we're losing a little bit of water. Look at us. This is us humans. Our feces is moist, so we're losing some water in there. And we're losing water every time that we breathe out. However, most of our water we lose through urinating. Let's talk about how humans and kangaroo rats gain water. Of course, for us humans, we drink most of our water and we gain some water in food. We also gain some water as metabolic water. What is that? What is metabolic water? Metabolic water is what comes out on the other end of an oxidation reaction of fuels like fats and carbohydrates. For example, like the oxidation reaction of glucose, C6H12O6. When combined with oxygen, you get carbon dioxide and water. So that's called metabolic water. Now look at the kangaroo rat. The kangaroo rat literally never drinks. And it gets most of its water from the little bit of water that is in the dry seeds that it eats, but most of it is metabolic water. Okay, what's going on with this unfortunate but handsome young fellow? He has clearly collapsed because he lost about 10% of his water. Now, if this unfortunate but handsome young explorer lost just 2% more, so his water deficit gets to 12%, he cannot swallow. Even if someone comes to his rescue and offers him water, he literally wouldn't be able to control his throat muscles to swallow that water. And then if this unfortunate but handsome young explorer loses just 3% more water, bringing his total water deficit to 15%, he would die. Okay, what's going on here? What is up with this rude iguana sneezing but not into its elbow? What's happening is that the kidneys of reptiles are not very efficient at removing salts. Marine birds, which are kind of a reptile, marine birds and other reptiles have salt glands to excrete high concentrations of NaCl, salt, through their nares, which are their nostrils. So you see here the marine iguana sneezing, and the seagull has a salt glands that concentrate salt, and then they come out of the nostrils. All right, let's move on to thermal regulation. An animal's body temperature is a balance between heat gain and heat loss. And a lot of times we hear these terms cold-blooded and warm-blooded, but they're not very good scientific terms. They're not well defined. For example, a cold-blooded animal can be warm if it's warm outside. Or a warm-blooded animal can be cold if it's hibernating. So the more precise scientific terms are ectotherms and endotherms. Ectotherms have body temperatures that are determined by heat acquired solely from the environment, so from the outside. This includes most invertebrates and some vertebrates, such as amphibians, non-avian reptiles, and most fishes. In contrast, an animal can be an endotherm, which means that it has body temperature determined by heat derived from an animal's own oxidative metabolism. So the heat comes from within, thus endotherm. And this includes animals such as birds and mammals, and some reptiles, and some fast-swimming fishes, and a few insects. So since ectotherms cannot regulate their core body temperature through their own metabolism, they need to regulate it through their behavior. For example, ectotherms can seek areas where the temperature is favorable to their activities, as you see this desert lizard exploiting hour-to-hour changes in solar radiation to keep its body temperature relatively constant. But endotherms can control their body temperature, and that this is their balancing act between heat produced and heat lost. So how is heat produced and how is heat lost? Well, heat can be produced just by its own basal metabolism. Just staying alive produces heat because the cells are active, involved in all kinds of chemical reactions that are producing heat. One of those chemical reactions is the oxidation of food. Like I mentioned, the oxidation of C6H12O6 results in CO2 and metabolic water, but also heat. And muscular contractions also result in heat. That's why when we exercise, we get hot. So how is heat lost? Well, through a variety of physical processes like radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. Let's take a look at this graphic here. In this graphic, we have an animal that lives or that has a core body temperature of 37 C, and it's living in an environment where the air temperature is 25 C. So the animal is warmer than its environment. The animal is soaking up some sun, so it's gaining heat through direct solar radiation. However, because the animal is warmer than the environment, it's going to lose heat to its environment by radiation. That's why if we were to take a photograph with an infrared camera of this animal, we would see that infrared heat leaving the animal. Conduction is basically the transfer of heat from a warm body to a colder body when those two bodies contact each other. So here the animal's making contact with a cooler ground, so it's losing heat by conduction to the ground. And convection are basically air currents. So here the immediate air outside of the animal is going to be warmed up by the animal, but wind is going to take that air away from the animal, thus cooling it. And just because warm air rises, that means that the animal is also just going to lose heat because warm air rises away from it. Now, this is important. What would happen to these forces, radiation, conduction, and convection, which are purely physical processes, if the air and ground temperature are warmer than the animal? Okay, what would happen to these arrows? What process does the animal still have to cool itself? I'll leave that for you to figure it out. All right, let's keep talking about endotherms adaptations for hot environments, because many small animals that live in deserts are fossorial, which means they live underground, and or nocturnal, which means they live at night. Why do you think that is? What is it about the underground environment that is so favorable? Or what is it about the nocturnal environment that is so favorable? Now, some larger animals cannot live underground. For example, this large desert animal cannot escape the desert heat by living in a burrow. So, what adaptations does this African eland possess to regulate its temperature in the hot, arid savanna? Okay, endotherms don't just need to adapt to hot environments, but also to cold environments. So, how do endotherms maintain homeothermy in the cold? Well, they have to decrease the amount of heat lost to the environment, and they can do that by thickening the fur or the down feathers. They can live under snow, and that's surprising, but the temperature under snow is not much colder than 0 Celsius, and it can be much, much colder above the snow. And this neat other adaptation that some endotherms have is called countercurrent heat exchange. Let me explain with this graphic. Here we have an Arctic wolf. Its body temperature is 37 Celsius. Outside is negative 30 Celsius. So you see there's a huge difference between inside the body and outside the body. So blood is coming here from the heart down this artery at 37 degrees. And if it kept going at 37 degrees here, there would be so much opportunity for it to lose heat at the pause. But this is a really cool way to retain heat or to decrease heat loss by tightly coupling the arteries with the veins such that the artery is losing heat to the vein. So here, as blood flows down here at 37, it starts losing heat to the vein that's right next to it. And so here's at 32 and at 26 and at 20. By the time it gets to the pause, the blood is already so cold that there's not much force driving the heat transfer from the paw to the environment. And so by the time the blood gets back to the heart, it's warm because the wolf lost its heat to itself from the arteries to its veins. The other strategy for maintaining homeothermy in the cold is to increase heat production. And an animal can do this with augmented muscular activity, which is when we're cold, we start kind of jacking in place, doing a little shadow boxing, going like this, right? Trying to increase our muscular activity, which could be voluntarily or involuntarily by shivering. And there's also a process called non-shivering thermogenesis, in which the body just starts making heat by increasing the oxidation of foods. Now, sometimes animals completely abandon homeothermy because being an endotherm is very energetically expensive. For example, hummingbirds will dramatically drop their metabolism when they're not active. So here in this graphic, we see on the y-axis the oxygen consumption as a measure of metabolism. And when the hummingbird is active in the daytime, it has a high metabolism, high body temperature. When it's inactive at night, has a very low metabolism and low body temperature. Bats also tend to do this, and this is called daily torpor. Sometimes this period of inactivity is much longer in duration. For example, in hibernation, a prolonged and controlled state of dormancy during winter with a corresponding drop of body temperature. Okay, that's the important part. A lot of people think of a hibernating animal like a bear, but when bears sleep for a long time in the winter, their body temperature doesn't drop that much, so they are not hibernating. But animals like marmots, who sleep for a long time in the winter and also drop their body temperature, they're hibernating. The opposite strategy is to sleep for a long time when it's very hot. We call that estivation, which is a state of dormancy during the summer when it is too hot and food and water resources are very scarce. So lungfishes and some desert animals like tortoises and pygmy mice estivate. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson on homeostasis. Be safe, remember to wash your hands, and always be strong and courageous.